Okay.
Okay. So welcome everyone. Today's speaker is David Kuritsa, and he received his PhD at Queen's University, Belfast in the UK in 2014. And then he worked as a postdoctoral fellow at Queen's University, Belfast from 2014 to 2017. And then in 2017, he joined Aberystwyth University of the UK as a research fellow and lecturer. And then last year, he came here to Boulder and was appointed as assistant astronomer at NSO. And his research interests include plasma diagnostics in the solar atmosphere, high-resolution spectroscopy and spectropolarimetry, and chromospheric fine structures and flares. Today we'll talk about chromospheric magnetometry from high-resolution ground-based observation. So please go ahead.
Thank you, Nick, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for organizers for having me today. It's a great pleasure to be here and give this presentation. So, as you can see, title of my talk is rather general. It is huge topic of solar physics and probably one of the most important one. And during my presentation, I'm going to cover a tiny fraction, of course, of this topic. I will just present some results from our recent works, which we have done during the last couple of years. And also I will outline some works from other people in context of the topic of this presentation. Okay, so let me start with a short introduction. Why we are studying solar magnetism, why it is important to investigate solar magnetism. Well, obviously the answer of this question is simple and straightforward. We know that the sun is a magnetohydrodynamic system. And in the solar atmosphere, everything is almost everything is controlled by the magnetic field. So it is the single most important parameter, the factor that determines almost everything in the solar atmosphere. And it is fundamental measurement for space weather and events like layers, CMEs, solar wind, and so on. And it is very important to understand for energy transport and dissipation mechanisms, including chromospheric and coronal heating problem, MHD waves, and so on and so on. So it's absolutely clear that we need to be able to measure the magnetic field in the solar atmosphere if we want to understand the sun. So here I have this quote from Billings 2009. I like it very much because it kind of summarizes the scale of this problem. So despite such huge importance, we still cannot measure properly the magnetic field in the solar atmosphere. And this quote summarizes, as I said, the scale of the problem. So Billing is just pointing out that there are lots of situations in solar research when magnetic field, especially in the corona, are just postulated without having any definite information concerning them. Okay, of course we have done lots of, we have made lots of progress, especially during the last couple of decades, and we have some very powerful and interesting tools and methods to measure and infer magnetic field in the solar atmosphere. So we have extrapolation methods when basically we are taking the photospheric magnetograms and extrapolating field into the upper layers based on some limitations and physics. So all these methods have some pros and cons. We have a method called magnetoseismology when magnetic field is inferred with the properties of MHD waves. We have radio observations, which also has some limitations, and I will mention some, I will present some radio observations later. But the most powerful tool to infer the magnetic field in the solar atmosphere is measuring the polarization state of light. We know that electromagnetic radiation can be polarized, and there are different mechanisms, physical mechanisms that can polarize electromagnetic radiation. There are some incomplete list, but for us astronomers, probably the most important one is magnetic field. So we know that magnetic field is polarizing the spectral lines, and with that, by measuring polarization signatures in the spectral lines, we can infer the magnetic field. So mostly my talk will focus on Zeeman spectropolarimetry. I'm not going to talk with some basics of spectropolarimetry. I know where am I now, but just to summarize, I just want to point out that we have very well developed spectropolarimetry tools at almost any level now. So we know the basic physics behind spectropolarimetry, Zeeman spectropolarimetry, at a very advanced and deep level. And we have mathematical formalisms which can be used to characterize the polarization signatures in electromagnetic radiations. I'm talking about Stokes formalism. And we have equation, radiative transfer equation for polarized light. And we know how to solve this equation. We have very well developed instrumentations like spectropolarimeters for astrophysical measurements and telescopes. We know what sort of signatures we are expecting in our observations. So here I have typical Zeeman splitting in sunspot, and I have these images here, Stokes IQ U and V images, which directly maps the magnetic field in the solar atmosphere, and we know how to calculate magnetic field from these maps, the vector magnetic field. So why it is a still problem to measure magnetic field when we have such well-developed spectropolarimetry tools? I will just outline two basic reasons. So in the photosphere, we in principle routinely measure the magnetic field. So we have instruments and telescopes like SDO HMI, which measures the magnetic field hourly basis. But if we zoom out some small region from this SDO image and compare it to high resolution observations, we will see that in the higher resolution observations, there are some very small scale magnetic elements which are not resolved in HMI image. Okay, here is another example. So now we have decreased image obtained with WISP spectropolarimeter. That's not the highest resolution WISP image. However, again, if we compare to this image to relatively lower resolution HMI magnetogram, we will again see that there are lots of small scale magnetic elements in this WISP image, which are not resolved in HMI magnetogram. So the question is, in general, how small magnetic fields are in the solar photosphere. So everyone who is working on inversions and inferring the magnetic field from the Stokes profiles knows the problem about magnetic filling factor, which is basically fraction of resolution element covered by the magnetic field. And we always have this problem. So because we just don't know how much is the filling factor in our observations. This problem also can be seen in high resolution photospheric images in continuum. So this is again biggest VBI image, one of the highest resolution image we have for the solar photosphere. And in those continuum images, we know that apart from granulation patterns, there are very small scale bright points, and we know that those bright points are associated with magnetic field. We can actually use those bright points for the proxy magnetometry. And if we zoom out this image, we will see that those bright points are very, the sizes of those bright points are very small. Again, if we go with higher resolution images, are we going to expect in even smaller sizes magnetic elements? This is the question which we need to resolve, and for this we need, probably even higher resolution observations and simulations and so on. Okay, in the upper atmosphere, in the corona and chromosphere, we have kind of different type of problem, which is related to well-known photon starvation problem. So photon starvation is the well-known phenomenon all across the astronomy, but even on the sun, we have this problem. When we are talking about polarized emissions that comes from the upper layers, from chromosphere and corona, we know that we have the very low photon flux. I just want to show you this plot. I will talk about this plot in more detail later, but now I just want to point out the scale of the STSW, which we can see here. So this is the STSW profile of the coronal loop observed at around 25 megameters from the surface, from the photosphere. And the size of STSW in continuum intensity units is something like less than 0.2%. So that's the kind of STSW polarization signals we are dealing in the chromosphere and corona, which means that we need very highly sensitive instruments and large aperture telescopes to detect and investigate this type of signals. And we don't have it now. At this moment, we don't have it now. When we don't have enough signal-to-noise ratio in our observations, what we are doing is we are trying to somehow increase signal-to-noise ratio. And one standard way to increase signal-to-noise ratio is the integration of signals. So here I'm showing one of the first successful measurement of coronal magnetic field with STSW in iron 13 line. And as you can see, in order to achieve required signal-to-noise ratio, this data was integrated over the 240 arc second slit length and over 44 minutes. So integration time was 44 minutes. This is another example where integration time was 17 minutes and signals were averaged over 20 arc second. So in some cases, this integration and averaging of signal, polarization signal helps us to measure magnetic field, but the problem is that we know that solar chromosphere and corona is very inhomogeneous and very dynamic. So we really need to have higher resolution observations for understanding the magnetic field and for measuring the magnetic field. So is there anything we can do apart from integration of signal to improve our signal to noise ratio? Well, we should select obviously the appropriate telescope, the large aperture telescopes and instruments and spectral lines. So we have some amazing ground-based telescopes like Peakist, Swedish Solar Telescope, and so on, which we can use for this type of observations. Another thing which we can do is somehow define the structures with higher density, and higher density obviously means that we may get the stronger signal, and we may try and find structures with orientation, appropriate orientation, and some sort of reduced background or foreground noise. So we can try this type of things. Now, when I'm talking about structures with higher density in the chromosphere and corona, these are type of structures I'm talking about. So we know that apart from very low density and very hot structures in the corona, you also have relatively cool and higher density structures. So I just want to point out this. When I'm talking about corona, I determine corona in terms of geometrical height with respect to the photosphere. So for me, everything which is, let's say, 3 megameters above the photosphere is corona. So one can criticize me, so one can say that corona is not actually the simply geometrical height, but it's the plasma state. It's the thermodynamic, what we have in plasma. But if we are talking about magnetic field, I think we can safely say that, safely talk about corona as the height with respect to the photosphere. So, for example, here I have these coronal loops, which I'm calling the coronal loop, but one could say that this is not coronal loop, this is chromospheric loop, because it appears in chromospheric spectral lines. It is chromospheric plasma. But it is located, the height of this arcade is 25 megameters, so it is located into the corona. So we also have spicules, relatively lower lying structures, but again, they are reaching at coronal heights. And we have fibrils, so this is a Peakist image in H beta. This is SST H beta, which shows this nice fibrils or loops. So the strategy is we can target these type of structures because they are relatively dense and they are appearing in the coronal spectral lines. So we can use, in the chromospheric spectral lines. So we can use chromospheric diagnostic to infer magnetic field there. One of the very good targets is for this type of study is so-called FLIR loops. So FLIR loops are created after impulsive phase of the FLIR. So according to standard FLIR model, we know that initially the FLIR energy is released into the corona, but then this energy is transported towards the lower layers along the magnetic field lines, magnetic loops, via accelerated electrons, and then this energy is dissipated into the chromosphere because of the high density of the chromosphere and the photosphere, which produce intense impulsive heating into the chromosphere, and in turn, this heating produces the plasma evaporation back into the FLIR loop, into the magnetic loops. This plasma initially is hot and dense, but it is cooling down very quickly. And at some point, we are ending up into the situation when we have coronal loops filled with very high density cool plasma. And for that loops, we can use chromospheric diagnostics and try and measure magnetic field. So good example of one of the most popular example of this type of coronal loops are this SDO image at 304 angstrom. So yeah, you can see this downflowing, cooling spider or arcade of loops. But we can infer magnetic field with this type of data because this is just images. We need polarization, polarimetric data. Okay, so on September 10, 2017, we observed with Swedish Solar Telescope X8.2 class solar flare of the limb. And everything which I discussed in my previous slide, which could help to increase the signal to noise ratio of polarimetric observations, was ticked and checked there. That was probably one of the most lucky observations in solar physics. So it was very strong flare. It was right into the edge of the limb. And I will show you later that orientation of this loop arcade was also perfect to measure the line of sight component, magnetic field component. So here is some images. So we observed it in calcium 2 8542 angstrom and H beta as well. You can see these images at different spectral positions. This is line core image of these loops in H beta. So the observations were done with Fabry-Perot spectropolarimeter. So we scan the spectral lines and we obtained all full stocks profiles for this event. So here I'm showing the stocks V at minus 0.75 angstrom from the line core, and you can see how good the polarization signal, the stocks V signal is for these loops. We averaged signal a little bit over 0.23 arc second boxes. So the spatial resolution for final data was something like 170 kilometers. And temporal resolution was 60 seconds, which is basically the full scan time of Fabry-Perot for this calcium 2 line. Noise level in this data is something like 1 to 0.5, 10 to minus 3. And most of the signals of this loop for the pixels of this loop, we are above this noise level. Okay, we used weak field approximation to derive the magnetic field from Stokes wheel. Weak field approximation is very straightforward and nice tool, which one can use without solving the complicated radiative transfer problem for polarization radiation. So it is easy to derive the weak field approximation formulae from radiative transfer equation. So if the Zeeman splitting of the line is stronger than, if Zeeman splitting is less than thermal width of the spectral line, and which is basically happening for this calcium line, if field is less than 2.5 kilogauss, then we can use this expansion of Stokes V, and we can easily derive this formula. This is, as I said, very nice tool because it relates the polarization profiles to the intensity, the derivatives of the intensity. And this is super convenient because from observations, we can measure the polarization profiles, including Stokes I, and if we can fit these equations with in our measurement, we can directly infer the line of sight and perpendicular component of magnetic field. These are constants, and we know these constants. So another limitation of weak field approximation is that it only works for the magnetic field, for the magnetic field, which is free with gradients along the line of sight. So magnetic field and some other parameters like velocity should be constant along the line of sight. In that case, well, the profiles are, for example, Stokes V is anti-symmetric, which can be used to see for which profiles weak field approximation is applicable. So we did all of this, and most of the pixels of these FLIR loops, the weak field approximation was valid for most of those pixels in the FLIR loop. Again, this is one example. So red line here is derivative of Stokes I with respect to lambda, and Stokes V is this black dashed line. And you can see how well this Stokes V is fitted with the derivative. Okay, that's what we obtained. So here I have the map of line of sight magnetic field. I'm only showing pixels via magnetic field measurements. We are done accurately. So unfortunately, the Q and U signals, the linear polarizations, we are too noisy for inferring directly the perpendicular component of the magnetic field. But this data was obtained, as I said, with Fabry-Perot imaging spectropolarimeter. So apart from spectra, we also have images. And we used those images to measure the velocity components. So from the spectra, we measured the line of sight velocity component. And from the images, we measured the plane of the sky velocity components. We know that this plasma should be in a frozen in regime. So the plasma should be frozen into the magnetic field. This is chromospheric plasma, but plasma beta of these loops are still much less than 1. So Alwen theorem should hold there, which means that we can use the ratio of velocity components to calculate the ratio of magnetic field components. So basically, we can calculate the viewing angle of these loops, of this arcade. And we did that. And once we calculated this viewing angle, then we calculated total magnetic field. Okay. And this is the map of total magnetic field strengths. And at the top of this arcade, about 25 megameters, we measured something like 350 Gauss magnetic field. Okay, so another work which we did with this data was density diagnostic. So we used that Mali code, famous Mali code, which is non-LTE radiative transfer code. And we used both calcium and H-beta lines, and we inverted profiles and calculated the density, temperature, and some other thermodynamical parameters. And for density, we got these numbers, 10 to 12 for electron density, 10 to 12, 10 to 30 per cubic centimeter, which is very high electron density for coronal loops. So it is almost 100 times higher than normal coronal loop density. But probably it is not surprising because strong magnetic field in those loops somehow assumes or suggests that their density also should be strong. The density also should be large there. Okay, so luckily this event, that X8.2 class solar flare on September 10, was also observed with radio observations, with microwave observations. With this instrument, EOFSA, which is located in California. And with that data, these authors measured the magnetic field. So they derived the magnetic field by fitting those microwave spectrum with gyrosynchrotron model. This image shows some results from this analysis. So they measured the magnetic field at different height. And the results they obtained for magnetic field are super consistent with our measurement. Actually, it's not just consistent, it's one can say that it's exactly the same, almost exactly the same. So at 25 megameters, they measured 376 Gauss, and we measured 350 Gauss. This is like exciting, I think. Now the question is such a strong field at that height in coronal loops unusual, unexpected, or it is fine and it is expected? Well, one can argue that this is slightly unexpected. Well, if we estimate the magnetic field in coronal loops with very simple potential field dipole model, we can see that at that height, field strength in coronal loops should be much less than what we observed. So here I'm plotting this magnetic field using this simple analytical formula. So HD here is so-called dipole depth, and D is the foot point magnetic field. H is just height with respect to the photosphere. And as you can see, even if we assume that the foot points of coronal loops are in a very strong sunspots like 4,000 Gauss or 5,700 Gauss, it is still estimating much less, much weaker field what we measured. So that's our measurement. Okay, it's 25 megameters. So for this active region where this flare happened, some other works estimated the magnetic field of main sunspot a couple of days before this X8 class flare happened, and they measured some very strong magnetic field in that sunspot, in some part of those sunspots, in particular the light bridge of the sunspot. But even if we take that strong field, 5,700 Gauss, we are not still close to what our measurement estimated. So here I'm showing the plot from this paper, which was published last year. And this plot selects some set of magnetic field measurements using radio observations. And as you can see, there are lots of observations with radio, which estimates the kilogauss field in the corona. Well, it's 10 megameters height. So this plot also shows our measurement, which is somewhere there. This green plot here shows the famous empirical model done by Dark and McLean, 1978. And as you can see, almost all those measurements are above this green plot. However, I would like to draw your attention to the blue and black curves. So blue and black curves are obtained. So these are also models, but these are obtained from potential field extrapolation. So that work was done by Amphignatov et al. 2019. So that's the work which I already mentioned when they measured the magnetic field of the sunspot using HMI and HINODEM. And they measured, as I said, very high magnetic field in that sunspot, something like 5,700 Gauss. And then they used very advanced extrapolation method, and that's the result of that extrapolation. And as you can see, these measurements are kind of fit with those models. So now the question is that what we know from radio observations and high-resolution spectropolarimetry, there are magnetic field in the corona which is very strong. Could be order of kilogauss, couple of hundred Gauss. And however, there are some other measurements with relatively low resolution coronal spectropolarimetry and magnetoseismology, but these works are mostly infers the magnetic field which is much weaker than what radio and high resolution spectropolarimetry is measuring. Now here, of course, these are not full list. I'm pretty sure that lots of nice observations are and papers are missing here. But I'm also listing papers which are dedicating the measurement of magnetic field in spicules and fibrils. And in the next couple of slides, I want to talk about this. So in 2020, sorry, this should be 2020, Kryginski et al. Measured the magnetic field in spicules, again with big field approximation. And they inferred about, again, couple of hundred Gauss field in spicules. And this is also relatively higher what previous measurements have suggested for spicules. So this is one of the first successful measurement of spicules magnetic field done by Centeno et al. So they used helium-10 870 angstrom line. At height which is about 2-3 arc-second from the photosphere. So again, in order to get the required signal-to-noise ratio, they averaged and integrated signal over 45 minutes. And these are results of this measurement. So the strongest magnetic field they measured along the slit was something like 45 Gauss in spicules. And again, this field is much weaker than what high-resolution spectroscopy is inferring. This is another work which we have done with DKIST data. So we measured the magnetic field in plush spicules, in plush fibrils. So we used 8542 angstrom line, and we inverted this line using non-LT inversion code. And here is the map of line of sight magnetic field. And so in fibrils, we measured a couple of hundred Gauss field with this data. This is again one of the old work done with helium-1D3 observations with advanced Stokes polarimeter instrument at Dan Solar Telescope. And this is also the plush fibrils. The split is located somewhere there, which is a couple of arc-second above the visible limb above the photosphere, and that's the measurement. So again, the magnetic field strength measured with this data was something like 30 Gauss, 35 Gauss in plage fibrils. To go back to this slide, I just want to point out one more time that we have some sort of difference between measurements which we have with radio and high resolution observations, high resolution spectropolarimetry, and results what we have from relatively low resolution spectropolarimetry and magnetoseismology. And the question is why we are getting these differences. I don't think we have now the definite answer on this question. The reason could be some sort of observational bias we have in this different method. For example, with radio, we know that we only can infer very strong magnetic field. So to measure all those gyro resonance frequencies and radio spectrum, polarization in radio spectrum, there should be very strong field. So, and then we simply means that probably radio observations is biased towards the strong field. But with high resolution spectropolarimetry, we can infer weaker field, but mostly in the chromosphere and corona, we are measuring pretty strong field. Another reason could be, yes, again, the resolution of low resolution coronal spectropolarimetry. It's quite possible that when we are integrating the signals for polarization data, resulted inferred magnetic field is underestimated. This could be another reason. But I think this is something we need to investigate in the future. Because in general, question is how strong is the field in the chromosphere, in the chromospheric canopy, in spicules, in the corona, in coronal loops. Are those kilogauss field in coronal loops very rare and and are we getting it only when we have extremely strong sunspot, or this is kind of typical field in coronal loops? Yeah, again, at this moment, we don't have answer on this question, but I think we are not far to the point when we understand much better and when we will have the answers on those questions. So this is my final slide. Our main objectives for chromospheric and coronal spectropolarimetry could be in the future to obtain more high resolution spectropolarimetric observations, combined observations with in different spectral ranges like optical, infrared, UV, radio. And now we have amazing set of instruments which can provide the data for this type of studies. We have DKIST, which can do the chromospheric and coronal spectropolarimetry. So I think in the next decade or so, we will make lots of progress in the magnetometry of the solar photosphere. Thank you very much for your attention. If you have any questions, I'm happy to try and answer.
Thank you. Any questions in person or online? We go online first. Anita?
Yes, hi. Hi, Data. Thank you for the nice presentation. And, I was just curious when you were showing the comparison between two different types of the measurement. Yes, yes. So you think maybe this is caused, yes, exactly, by the type of the measurement, right? So you see that we can see only the high magnetic fields in the range of radio and microwave observations, right?
Yes, yes. I mean, for radio, I think it's definitely true because if we have loops with, for example, 50 Gauss field, we can't measure this with radio because it's not appearing properly in radio spectrum, in microwave, in radio. So radio observations is definitely biased with that regard. But I would not say this for high resolution Zeeman spectropolarimetry. So one of the slides I showed here, that one. So here, the magnetic field is something like 35 Gauss. So in principle, we can measure with very weak field for example, with calcium-2 spectropolarimetry. So we don't have that bias in optical spectropolarimetry or near-infrared spectropolarimetry.
Okay, but, I have another question because these values are for the magnetic field inside the coronal loops, or this is like due to the flares? Because I didn't get it.
Yeah. So these are coronal loops. These are, people are sometimes calling it post-FLIR loops. So these fields are basically there. So at the top, we have something like 350 Gauss. So these are relatively lower lying prominence, and field is much stronger there. But when I'm talking about coronal loops, mostly I'm talking about this part.
Okay, thank you.
On that color scale, aren't there many fields below 100 Gauss?
You mean there?
No. I thought the weak fields were the lighter colors.
Yes.
Those are 50 Gauss?
Yeah, something like that. But this is line of sight component.
Yuhong?
Yeah, I just was wondering in this field strength for the post-FLIR loops, can you tell which the component? Were you able to determine the components that's along the neutral line versus components perpendicular to neutral? What I'm trying to see is whether it was the post-FLIR loops. I mean, post-FLIR loops are already reconnected, and then usually it's close to potential, but usually it can be very sheared. It still contain free magnetic energy. I'm just wondering, were you able to determine, separate the component that's in that total field that's parallel to the neutral line versus the part that's perpendicular to neutral
line? Yes, so I don't think it is possible to determine where the polarity inversion line is located here, because the mostly, one can see the part of the FLIR ribbon, but I mean, the foot points are kind of behind the limb already, and probably the most part of the polarity inversion line is behind the limb. So it's difficult to determine the position, but you are absolutely right. I think these loops are most potential because mostly, yes, the post-FLIR loops are very close to potential state because all of those non-potential magnetic energies released already. So if we look the movies, we have these downflows, yes, and these downflows, also suggest that most likely the threads in this arcade are not tangled or something.
Right.
Sorry, was that your question?
Yeah, I was just trying to see if the post-flare loops are very non-potential, still contain some shear left. That's possible. Lots of observations found that the post-flare loops are very sheared still contain treatment because you found that the extrapolation, potential field extrapolation, still compared to your measurement, it's still too low, right? So I was wondering.
Yeah. So potential field extrapolation here is shown with the blue and black lines. And our measurement is so this and this. Yes,
oh, okay.
Relative.
So they agree.
It is a little bit smaller, but it's quite close with
Okay.
Potential field extrapolation model. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Can I ask, what is the green line in this plot?
Oh, green line is the empirical model done by Dalk and McLean. So, yes, measurements are above this green line, but I think this model is mostly valid for coronal field very high into the atmosphere. If I remember correctly, this model was this empirical model was calculated for the magnetic field above 1 solar radii or something like. So probably it's not surprising that these measurements are not fit well with the green line because these are relatively lower coronal magnetic fields.
Rebecca?
Thanks, Data. I really very much enjoyed this talk. I was curious as to what were the transverse fields that you estimated from making the assumption of frozen in magnetic fields, and what kind of linear polarization signatures might those fields what kind of signals to noise would we need to achieve to be able to measure linear polarization for the fields that you estimated for the transverse component?
Oh, yeah. This is very good question, Rebecca. And yeah, I have not thought about this, but this is very interesting indeed. I can do these estimates. Yeah, I can do some calculations and estimate this. Yeah.
Or just at least if you have a sense of what the transverse fields that you estimated from this were, because I'm really eager to get to measure these.
Yes, I will definitely do this.
Chromospheric lines on.
But yes, so the transverse field is probably transverse field is also a couple of 100 Gauss there, and I will definitely check. What sort of linear polarization could produce?
Yeah, I'm sure it's below your noise level, and I mean you're measuring with a filtrograph instrument, so you're very limited there. But yeah, that's cool. Thank you so much for the talk.
Can I ask if you got extremely lucky with this observation, and there was also a stereo satellite that looked at this region from a different angle? Or did you check if there is one of the twin satellites also pointing in this location?
Yeah, if I remember correctly, I checked the stereo data for this flare, and something important was missing there. I don't remember exactly what, but I think one stereo satellite was not working at that time or something like that. I don't remember, but something is missing there, yes. It's stereo.
Any other questions here or online? If not, thank you again.